Step 3 is an assessment of environmental aspects. An environmental aspect is defined in ISO 14001 as an element of an organization's activities, products, and services that can interact with the environment. A clear understanding of an organization's environmental aspects and those which are most significant is essential when developing or updating an organization's environmental policy, setting objectives and targets, identifying additional training requirements, establishing operational controls, and developing an appropriate monitoring and measurement system. It is important to remember that these aspects can be within or external to your organization's property boundaries. Typically, an assessment of environmental aspects will focus on two broad categories: aspects directly regulated by applicable laws and regulations, and unregulated environmental aspects. An initial starting point for you to identify aspects is a process or block flow diagram that identifies resource inputs and emission outputs at your site. Next, consideration should be given to the following issues. First, location of the activity. Second, frequency or potential of occurrence. And third, severity. ISO 14001 does not require that you use enumerated criteria in determining significance. Remember, I mentioned that the standard allows for some flexibility. Therefore, your organization's definition of significance will depend on a variety of considerations related to the business and environmental issues. Documenting the definition of significance and the overall assessment of environmental aspects will allow you to demonstrate how thoroughly your organization has investigated the potential impacts on the environment. Spreadsheets, tables, lists, and graphs are an easy-to-read and user-friendly way to document the organization's review and findings. The key is keeping the methodology as systematic as possible in order to prevent the facility from missing any issues. The fourth step involves environmental objectives and targets. Developing environmental objectives and targets is a critical part of the ISO 14001 planning process. When looking at objectives and targets, you may want to consider legal and other requirements, significant environmental impacts, technological options, financial and business requirements, and the views of other interested parties. Objectives and targets must be consistent with the organization's environmental policy and commitment to pollution prevention. One suggestion is to hold a brainstorming session with key people within the facility to think about the following with respect to objective setting. Where does the organization want to invest financial resources? Are there any outstanding or crucial compliance issues? Is the facility committed to pollution prevention? And if so, how? Is there a potential for process and design innovations? What are the current and future training needs? What are the significant environmental impacts? Consider information technology and how this might help you with objective setting and tracking. The key is to tie environmental objectives to your organization's existing business objectives. This is the best way to elevate environmental performance to the same level as other business functions. It will also encourage sharing limited resources within an organization in order to meet objectives. Once the objectives have been set, there should be at least one measurable target for each. For example, let's say your objective is to reduce energy consumption. A measurable target might include reducing energy usage in lighting by 15% by a certain date. Here's another example. Let's say your objective is to reduce waste from materials used in research and development activities. A specific target could be that by January 31st of 1998, you will complete an analysis of all vendor-supplied R&D materials and identify specific opportunities for returning materials to the vendors. The fifth step is environmental documentation. This step entails the review of your organization's documentation structure. Depending upon the findings associated with this review, this step may also entail the development of procedures, specifications, work instructions, best management practice, and/or an environmental manual. Here are some steps to help you through this documentation stage. First, determine what is needed. This information should already be noted in the results of the gap analysis. Second, determine the format for all documents. Assess whether there is an existing format requirement within your organization or whether there is any flexibility with respect to this issue. Third, consider prototyping each document in an attempt to generate documentation that is easy to read and use. Visualize the end from the beginning. Fourth, assign writing tasks. For instance, procurement personnel should be involved in the establishment of written procedures for procuring equipment, hazardous materials, or environmental services. Fifth, set up a document tracking system. Ensure that within the format chosen, there's a way to track document revisions, page numbers, and authorization signatures. Sixth, set up a master list or library of environmental documents. And finally, don't forget to use the documents. Another recommendation for addressing documentation requirements is to create a manual describing and documenting the organization's EMS. The manual may serve as a level 1 or simple document which anyone can pick up and use. For example, in the case that the plant manager or environmental manager be unavailable or in the event of an inspection or other incident. The manual can also serve as a tool to provide the third-party auditor with a solid overview of the organization's multimedia management efforts. The sixth step is to create an EMS awareness campaign. One of the most important steps in implementing an EMS is making stakeholders not only aware of the EMS, but having them embrace the system as well. It is important that the organization's commitment to the environment be communicated to the stakeholders. Sharing your environmental policy on a large-scale level is a good start. Next is the implementation of creative ways to communicate with all facility employees how their job responsibilities could potentially have an impact on the environment, and why their support of the organization's EMS is so important. Communication methodologies will, of course, vary from organization to organization. However, as long as the key concepts are communicated and internalized by the receptors, the task will be completed effectively. Communication methodologies that a facility may want to consider include producing fact sheets, holding site tours, holding public meetings, establishing phone lines to answer questions or record concerns, and going to local schools or community colleges to create interest in your organization. The seventh step is registrar selection. The registrar is the organization that conducts the conformity assessment for your organization. The conformity assessment is an assessment to determine whether your EMS conforms to the EMS requirements in ISO 14001. Just a quick note on terminology. In the United States, registration is the process by which your organization applies for placement on a publicly available list of entities that conform to a specified standard. In this case, registration would signify that your EMS conforms to ISO 14001. A registrar is the organization that accepts the registration following an assessment process through which the registrar confirms that your organization's EMS program conforms to ISO 14001. This is the conformity assessment. Now, a registration certificate is received when the EMS of your organization, location, or plant or process is demonstrated to conform to ISO 14001. Certification can also be used to describe the process by which individual auditors demonstrate their competence to perform ISO 14001 EMS audits. A certifier is the entity that certifies in writing that individual auditors have demonstrated the competency specified by the standard. In Europe, for instance, the term certification has the same meaning that registration does in the United States. Accreditation is the procedure by which an authoritative body formally recognizes the competence of a body or person to carry out specific tasks. Assuming you want to go the certification route, you should choose a registrar with whom a positive professional relationship can be established. This is extremely important. I've seen more cases than I thought I would in which conformity assessment activities and certification processes became tedious, time-consuming, and just plain unpleasant because the organization and registrar did not see eye to eye on basic issues with regards to EMS development and implementation. For instance, make sure that you and your registrar interpret the standard the same way. Make sure that you both are clear on the difference between the review of conformance and compliance issues and have set a way for dealing with both issues during the conformance assessment. Talk about how you're going to determine significance with respect to the impacts of your environmental aspects before the conformity assessment. There are a few things that you can do beforehand to ensure that you select a registrar that is truly going to be a partner of yours throughout the process. Steps to facilitate this selection could include soliciting statements of qualifications and interviewing. Review registrar personnel qualifications, education, and expertise. Choose someone that knows your business. And once you've identified specific auditors, make sure that these are indeed the auditors to perform your conformity assessment and that substitutions are not made at the last minute. You're the customer. It's important that the registrar understand and be sensitive to your organization's business priorities and culture. Also, check to see what certifying body has accredited the registrar. Has the registrar been accredited in your country or another? Just because they've been accredited in one country doesn't mean they can't work in yours. However, how much experience they not only have with your type of business, but also in your country is important. Step 8 involves the pre-assessment. An excellent way to prepare a facility for the conformity assessment or to verify ISO 14001 conformance is to conduct a pre-assessment. The purpose of the pre-assessment is to identify areas requiring additional work prior to the certification audit or to ensure conformance. The pre-assessment should be comprehensive and systematic. The focus should be on how ISO 14001 is used and implemented, and how well your organization's product, processes, services, and management systems meet the specifications defined in the standard. Now, there's one very important thing to remember as you are going through these steps and utilizing the tools described. Integrate cultural variables throughout your efforts. An EMS can be successfully implemented in supportive cultural environments. Accordingly, your organization should be culturally sensitive during EMS planning and implementation stages. In short, I cannot stress enough the importance of stepping back and taking some extra time to increase the understanding and awareness of cultural variables so that your organization's employees will truly understand the importance of and support the program. Integrating cultural variables into environmental management systems can be as simple as translating the policy, procedures, company brochures, or other information into a different language. However, it can be as complicated as designing and implementing an incentive program, which incorporates both employee lifestyle and work ethic factors. Remember, cultures come in different shapes and sizes. For instance, within an industrial facility, a department, focus group, or even a group of friends could be considered a culture. Each one of these cultures has a set of shared expectations or norms which become the accepted and supported behaviors within the group. Activities associated with the implementation of an EMS must become a part of these accepted behaviors in order to be successful. I'd like to share with you a few lessons I've learned based upon my own personal experience in assisting businesses with the development and implementation of ISO 14001 EMSs. First of all, documentation is crucial. The only way to verify your organization's EMS's conformance to ISO 14001 is to show documentation that it does conform. Unless something is in writing, it is difficult to prove that it actually exists. Second, the gap analysis can set the tone for the rest of the EMS development and implementation efforts. If the gap analysis is hurried and random, it's likely that the subsequent activities will be the same. However, if the organization engages in simple strategic planning to assess how it is going to get from point A to point B, the process will be smooth and efficient. Third, don't just adopt, but adapt when developing and implementing an EMS. And finally, be prepared. Prior to the conformance assessment, ensure that personnel and resources are available during the audit process. Consider reserving a conference room for the duration of the audit. If practical, have all of the environmental documentation available in one place for review. In the conference room would make it easiest. I guess if I could leave with you some final words regarding ISO 14001 and its impacts on your organizations and countries, I'd summarize by saying a proactive approach to compliance can place business ahead and improve its global competitive advantage. The intent of ISO 14001 is to balance business goals, such as productivity, with environmental responsibility. Remember its history and where it came from. This is its overall intent. In the long run, though you may experience expenditures with the initial development and implementation of your EMS, the overall result over time, however, is to assist with your organization's overall business goals. Talk to other companies that have been through the process. You'll see that over time, there truly will be opportunities to increase productivity while taking a proactive stance with respect to environmental protection. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kraus. And now let's begin with our first question-answer session. We will try to answer as many questions as possible. Therefore, we ask that only one question be asked per phone call, and that these questions be as brief as possible. You may call the studio directly at the phone numbers or fax which now appear on your screen. We remind you to make your phone calls at the distance from the monitor to avoid feedback. All right. We have our first call, and it's from the Institute Universidad Expresia University Balas Pascal, Colombia.
We're calling from Córdoba, Argentina, Universidad Blas Pascal, meeting with a group of students of middle high school education. They have prepared the following question. Is it possible to use the reference framework of ISO 14000 to orient the policies at at or city levels? Thank you.
Wayne, I think that would be best answered by you.
As a matter of fact, U.S. EPA and Department of Energy have jointly funded in the United States a project to try exactly that concept out in 6 cities across the United States. I can't tell you specifically which ones, I don't recall, but that's an idea that seems worth trying, and the United States government is making that effort.
If I may, I might also add that in Europe as well, there are certain municipalities and cities that are also looking at the eco-management and audit scheme standard for applicability to municipalities as well. So we're seeing that happen in Europe as well.
Okay. We have another question from Instituto Político Nacional Educacional Continuo.
I believe that the ISO 14000 is a step towards the right direction. However, the concern that has been voiced at the international arena by non-governmental organizations is the following. The impact of the process of environmental management at a voluntary level is very weak in practice. It is used more as a green image or environmental protectionism rather than as significant implementation, because this is influenced by the businesses which use their personal interests rather than the ecology. What do you think about that?
Well, I think this brings up an interesting point. I know one of the things that we looked at with ISO 9000 was it was the first voluntary standard. Now we have 14,000. Jennifer, would you like to comment on the voluntarism of this?
Yeah, that's a very good question. You know, the concern is certainly an international concern. We've seen it in a lot of different countries. Non-governmental and other organizations are concerned about industry making these voluntary commitments. One of the things that is unique about the ISO 14000 standard is that it has a specific section in it that addresses legal and other regulatory requirements. So the company or the facility does have to have procedures and processes in place to address those legal and other requirements. So they cannot be ignored.
Wayne, from the legal side, do you see a little more impetus or force being brought in from the legal side of the business?
There's no question that ISO 14000 provides a floor because it contains a requirement for meeting basic requirements of that particular jurisdiction's environmental regulations and any voluntary standards that the organization subscribes to. But more important, I believe, is that it provides a basis for open discussion, greater disclosure. And greater disclosure will always lead to better compliance.
Thank you. And now we have a call from Universidad Central de Venezuela, Caracas.
Buenos días. Thank you very much from the University of Venezuela. This is our question. What is the time that takes to implement ISO 14000 in an organization? How can you, through the implementation of environmental systems, how could you then motivate the progressive innovation of a company or, for example, a production plant?
Very good. I know. I'm sorry, say again. Okay. Very good question. I know in my experience with a lot of companies, the length of implementation depends upon where they are in the quality process. Wayne, what's your experience with the length of implementation?
It really is going to depend, John, I think you're right, in both their experience with other quality management systems, such as ISO 9000, but also their ability to integrate environmental health and safety into the greater management whole. One of the things ISO 14001 tends to do is to bring the environmental health and safety group into contact with finance and marketing, the other segments of the organization, so that the greater those links, or the better those links are initially, the faster the implementation.
Jennifer, would you like to comment? Have you found any difference between the cost or the time to implement ISO or as a 14000?
Yeah, John, I've definitely seen a difference. I've seen the whole process, that is from start when a decision's been made to pursue ISO 14000 certification on through to certification itself. I've seen that take as little as 4 to 6 months and as much as 12 to 18 months. So it can take time, as Wayne was saying, it varies on what you've already got in place. I mentioned earlier doing some strategic planning, some planning up front, sitting down and looking at your internal resources, what you've already got to work with. But it can take a long time, and from a cost standpoint, John, I've seen it cost as little as $30,000 to $40,000, and I use the term "little" loosely, on up to over $100,000. So again, but you do have some control over that.
I know that both of you have had experience with ISO 9000, 14000. Do you find companies have a shorter implementation with 14,000 if they've already gone with 9,000? Jennifer?
From my perspective, there's no question that you do have every case that I've seen where the company's already 9,000 certified and they've gone to pursue 14,000 certification, your time is cut down. You have existing infrastructure in place, again, to shorten that implementation effort.
How's your experience has been, Wayne?
The other interesting aspect of it is if they've adopted 9,000 and now they're going to adopt 14,000, the organization has seen benefit from 9,000. And so the other thing you tend to get in those situations is greater senior management buy-in. They know this work. They know management systems work. They want to obtain the benefits of those systems. And so I think that also tends to drive it a little bit faster.
I know from my personal experience, I think you had a very key point there, is that senior management has to buy in. Without senior management, things can get drawn out. Now we have a call from Instituto Tecnológico de Saltillo in Mexico.
My question has to do with the fact that since ISO 14000 is a voluntary standard, and since given the costs that would be required for its implementations, what would be a tangible measure that would allow you to reduce these costs?
Oh, that's a real good one.
Esa es una pregunta muy buena.
Wayne, let's try you on this one first.
We have no science